You fined me for what? Having the porch light on too long. I stared down at the notice duct taped to my door like some kind of warning from a gang. Caleb had just handed it to me, standing there with that look on his face. The one that said, "You gonna keep ignoring this?" My name's Lucas Bryant. I teach American history at the local high school. Widower. Father. The house I live in? My parents built it in the '80s, back when this neighborhood actually meant something, when people still waved at each other. My son and I came back here after my wife passed. She loved the willow tree out by the lake, the one that bends low like it's listening to the water. That tree, it's where I asked her to marry me. It's where Caleb learned to skip stones. So yeah, I've got roots here. That's why I didn't sell. And that's why I didn't back down. Quick pause before we dive in. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe if HOA horror stories are your guilty pleasure. You won't believe how far this one goes. It started small, a warning for my garbage bins not being flushed against the wall. Okay, annoying, I pushed them back. Next week, another violation, lawn not mowed to regulation height. Caleb had done it 3 days prior. Then came the kicker, a $25.00 fine for obstructive decoration. You know what it was? A wooden owl my dad carved by hand. It sat on our porch for 30 years, never hurt a soul. Apparently it now compromised aesthetic unity. "Dad," Caleb said, chewing the inside of his cheek, "this isn't just nitpicking, they're targeting us." I shrugged. "It's just rules." He shook his head. "No, it's control." The woman behind it, Deborah Lynn Scott, HOA president, self-appointed monarch of Maple Hollow Estates. She wore beige like it was armor, had that clipped, crisp voice that always felt like an insult just got past you before you noticed. The first time we met was at an HOA meeting. I brought up the fines, thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. She smiled with her lips only. "Oh, Mr. Bryant, we strictly enforce all policies. Consistency builds community trust." Except I'd just passed 3 homes with Halloween decor still up and hedges spilling into the sidewalk. None of them had notices. I could feel Caleb stiffen next to me. He didn't say anything. But I could tell he was clocking every word, every fake smile, every patronizing shrug. After the meeting, Travis Kane, the HOA's grounds enforcement officer, cornered me near my car. Real charming guy, always wearing wraparound sunglasses even at dusk. "Hey man," he said, "just between us? Maybe try blending in a little more, less friction that way?" He patted my shoulder like I was some dumb puppy. Caleb stepped between us before I could answer. Didn't say anything, just stood there. Travis backed off. I wanted to believe it would pass, that if I just stayed polite, followed their rules, they'd move on to someone else. But that's the thing about people like Deborah. They don't stop when you comply. They stop when you push back. It was the porch light violation that did it for me. Apparently, my soft yellow bulb was a nuisance glare that disrupted the night aesthetic. What even is a night aesthetic? Caleb, who rarely raised his voice, finally snapped. "They're gaslighting us, Dad. This isn't order, it's harassment." I didn't want to believe it, but when I looked at the violation again, I noticed something I hadn't before. The timestamp, 2:14 a.m. Who's out patrolling porches at 2 in the morning? That's when I remembered something my wife used to say. Control is never about safety, it's about ego wearing a badge. I walked out to the lake that night, sat by the willow tree. Even after all these years, it still leaned the same way, still caught the moonlight like it was holding it in its leaves. And for the first time, I didn't just feel tired. I felt provoked. The next morning, Caleb was waiting by the kitchen counter. "What do we do?" he asked. I didn't have the full answer yet, but I knew one thing. We weren't backing down. Not here. Not at the house my parents built. Not with Deborah holding some master key like she owns the place. And definitely not when they were about to find out who they'd messed with. Caleb didn't wait for me to make coffee. He was already standing by the fridge, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at the kitchen window like something out there might move. "Deborah's not gonna stop," he muttered. "She's got her sights set." I rubbed my temple. I hadn't even brushed my teeth yet. "She's just overreaching. There's gotta be a line." "There was a line," Caleb snapped. "It's buried under her 4th violation slip." I studied my son. 19, but with that hard-cut jaw and steady eyes that looked older, like the grief aged him faster than it should have. He didn't bounce back after we lost Michelle. He sharpened. "I'll go talk to someone," I said. "Start with Mr. Novak. He's been on the board the longest. Maybe he's got a more balanced head." Caleb didn't reply, just pushed the crumpled porch light violation closer across the counter. "You really think she sends these out without everyone's approval?" By noon, I was walking the block toward Novak's house. He lived 3 houses down, corner lot with those perfectly trimmed azaleas and a flagpole that still creaked when the wind hit right. I remembered helping him put that pole in when I was 16. He'd shown me how to mix concrete. He opened the door slowly, like he already knew why I was there. "Lucas," he said, "not warm, not cold, just tired." "I just want to talk," I told him, man to man. He nodded and stepped back. His living room smelled like old books and lemon polish. Still had that same brown recliner and a dusty globe in the corner. The same place he used to tell ghost stories during block parties. "You've been here longer than anyone," I said, settling into the armchair. "Tell me something. When did this place stop being a neighborhood and start being a boot camp?" He gave a hollow chuckle, but his eyes didn't follow. "When people stopped pushing back." I leaned forward. "You don't agree with Deborah?" He sighed, long and slow. "She runs the board like it's a corporation, and everyone's scared to speak up. You challenge her, you get slapped with fines. Or worse, your paperwork gets lost, your permits stalled, your lawn measured twice a week." "Sounds like dictatorship wrapped in landscaping," I muttered. He gave a tired nod. "And she's clever, never puts her name on anything, just motions passed, notes approved, makes it look like consensus." "And you let her?" His eyes flicked to the hallway like he was afraid someone might hear. "It's not that simple." I let the silence hang. His fingers drummed the armrest, nervous, hesitant. Then he said, voice lower, "There's a clause in the bylaws, one she had added last year, buried under an amendment about emergency preparedness." "What kind of clause?" He looked me dead in the eye. "The board president can enforce fines, citations, and even initiate lien proceedings without a vote if she deems it time sensible. No oversight." I sat back, stunned. "That's not governance, that's unchecked power." "She claims it's temporary. But she's used it 17 times this quarter, and you're her favorite target." "Well," Novak's eyes dropped, "because you don't show fear. And because you brought that boy back here. She doesn't like questions, and your son asks them with his face." Before I left, he paused at the door. "Watch the mail," he said, "and if she sends Travis again, don't be alone." I walked home slower than I'd left. Everything Novak said ran laps in my mind. A secret clause, 17 fines, a board afraid of a woman in a beige suit. As I turned onto our lawn, Caleb was outside on the porch, hoodie pulled over his head. "You talked to Novak?" he asked. "Yeah." He studied me for a second. "You believe him?" "I believe he's scared." Caleb nodded once, then we're getting close to the nerve. That night, I pulled the original HOA bylaws from the kitchen drawer. Still had my dad's handwriting in the margins from when he served as treasurer back in the day. I laid it out on the table like a map of enemy territory. And for the first time, I saw the cracks. Buried in legalese, slipped in through emergency amendments. Deborah was building a kingdom, and no one was stopping her. But she wasn't ready for me. I was still at the kitchen table when the sun rose. Red morning light filtered through the blinds and painted the bylaws in streaks of gold like it was holy scripture. It wasn't. It was a lie wrapped in legalese. I had 3 sticky notes on the table. Clause 5.7. Deborah's emergency enforcement powers. Article 3B, board member immunity. Addendum 9C, property lien protocol. That last one hit like a punch to the ribs. They could put a lien on my home if I didn't pay the fines. Not might, could. Caleb came downstairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes, still in yesterday's clothes. "You been up all night?" I nodded. "Every single violation we've gotten? She stacked them to make a case." He pulled up a chair, eyes on the papers. "She's going to try to take the house." "Yeah," I said quietly, "and she's going to make it look legal." We both sat there for a while, not saying anything. just breathing in the weight of it. That afternoon, I walked down to the community garden. Not because I had anything to plant, but because that's where Lila James usually spent her Saturdays. She'd been on the HOA board for the last 5 years. She was also Michelle's old friend. She didn't see me at first. She was kneeling in the dirt beside a row of struggling tomatoes, sleeves rolled up, dirt under her nails, the usual warm smile nowhere on her face. "Mind if I water these?" I asked, nodding toward the rusted spigot nearby. She glanced up and nodded. "Knock yourself out." The hose groaned when I twisted it. The water sputtered, then finally sprayed in a weak arc. I aimed it at the base of the plants. "I saw the citation they posted on my door," I said casually. She didn't look at me, just adjusted a wooden stake around one of the vines. "They're planning a lien," I added. Her hands paused, only for a second, barely noticeable, but it was there. "I didn't vote for that," she said, too fast. I turned toward her. "Didn't vote for it? Or weren't allowed to vote?" She straightened up slowly, her eyes flicked toward the fence line, then back to the dirt. "Look, Lucas, it's not as simple as you think." "Sure it is," I said. "Someone's turning neighbors into suspects and silence into policy." Her voice got lower. "Deborah scares people. She doesn't scream, she threatens with procedure. She calls it compliance, but it's fear." I stepped closer. "You've been here long enough to know better." "I do know better," she said, eyes flashing, "but knowing and proving are two different things." The silence between us was sharp, like the air thinned. She finally looked up at me. "You want to hear something worse?" Her hands were trembling now, just barely. 3 weeks ago, she had me sign off on a permit for new surveillance cameras around the clubhouse. I asked why. She said there'd been unusual movement at night. I asked if we had a report. She said no. But I signed it. Because if I didn't, she'd make you the unusual movement, I said flatly. She nodded, lips pressed tight. I dropped the hose. It coiled near my feet like a sleeping snake. "You got anything concrete?" I asked. "Anything she slipped, said, wrote down?" She hesitated. "Maybe. There was a meeting last month. Closed door. She didn't know my recorder app was still on. I never deleted it. I just didn't do anything with it." I took a breath. "Can I hear it?" She didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. That night, Caleb and I sat on the back porch. The willow tree swayed above us in the warm wind, and the moonlight threw long shadows across the grass. "She's cracking," Caleb said. "Leela." "Yeah," I said, "but she's scared." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Good. Fear makes people honest." I stared out at the lake, my jaw tight. We don't need everyone, we just need the right one to tip. "And if we don't?" Caleb asked. "Then we remind them," I said. "What happens when the wrong people underestimate the right family?" And in that moment I knew we weren't gonna run. We were gonna fight. Hey, before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA, hit that subscribe button. You're gonna want to see how this one ends. The next morning, I was standing in the kitchen, staring out the window, hands wrapped around my coffee like it could stop the steam still rolling in my head. Karen had crossed a line. Twice. First, busting into our home with her master key. Then, threatening my son like he was some kind of criminal for locking the door she thought she owned. My wife Lana was quieter than usual. She just stood at the stove, flipping eggs with more force than needed. The spatula clanged against the pan like punctuation marks. I didn't say anything. We were both still, seething. Then came the knock. 3 firm taps. Rhythmic, measured. I opened the door and found Denise Lowry, the HOA secretary, clutching a clipboard to her chest like a bulletproof vest. Hey, she said, eyes darting. "I wanted to drop off this month's community bulletin." I reached for it. She didn't let go right away. "She wasn't supposed to use that key," she whispered. That's for emergencies." I studied her. Her fingers were trembling. Her eyes wouldn't stay still. But the look in them? That wasn't toyalty. That was guilt. "You saw the footage?" I asked. She nodded once. "Karen demanded access to the security room at the clubhouse, said it was for a compliance review. I was there when she pulled the tape." She paused. On the moment your son confronted her, she said, "Let's hope this never sees the light of day." There it was, proof they were hiding something. I didn't press her, didn't want her to backpedal, but I made a mental note. Denise wasn't all in with Karen. That could matter later. As she walked away, her head dipped low, like she'd just committed treason. Back inside, Liam was already at the kitchen table, laptop open. "You know she tried to delete the file," he said. My stomach twisted. "You got it saved?" He smirked. 3 times, cloud, hard drive, and one in a password-protected folder titled Tax Documents, because no one ever opens that. I half laughed. That kid had more foresight than most grown adults. I ruffled his hair and said, "Good work, soldier." That night, I took a walk to clear my head. The neighborhood used to feel like a community. Now it felt like surveillance. Everyone's curtains twitched. Sidewalk lights flickered like interrogation rooms. As I passed the old elm near the mailbox pavilion, I noticed something odd. Scrape marks on the ground. I crouched down. The pavement had a clean groove where a bolt had once been. My breath caught. They had moved the bulletin board. A month ago, Karen had pushed for a central announcement upgrade, claimed the old wooden board was a hazard. Now, it was a brand new electronic model with fingerprint access. Hers. But why would she remove the old one so suddenly? I started thinking back. The original board was right across from the clubhouse, visible from the parking cameras. The new one? Tucked by the south trailhead, no camera coverage. She'd moved it out of sight. I went home and pulled out the printed community codebook, the one Lana had kept since we moved in. I flipped to section 6, community announcements. All official postings must be visible from the central security cameras. I read it twice. Karen had broken her own bylaw. I took a picture of the section with my phone and sent it to Liam. "Print this, highlight line 4. My son didn't even ask why. He just nodded and said, "You want the highlighter in yellow or blood red?" Red. The next morning, I walked into the clubhouse and taped the page to the new board with a single note. Visibility matters. So does accountability. An hour later, I got a message from Karen. "Remove the posting. Immediately. Final warning." I didn't respond. Instead, I went back to the old bench near the lake, Dad's bench. The one he used to sit on every Sunday morning with his thermos and the local paper. The same bench Karen once said was unsightly and needed to be refurbished or removed. That bench had roots, like me. And I knew right then we weren't just fighting over rules. We were fighting over history. The lake was quiet. Too quiet. No ducks, no wind. Even the usual hum of a distant leaf blower was gone. I sat on Dad's bench with my elbows on my knees, staring across the water where his old canoe used to drift on slow Sundays. The same canoe Karen once tagged as unauthorized outdoor equipment and fined us $300.00 for. I hadn't thought about it in months. But now I couldn't stop. That bench, that boat, they were pieces of my dad. And if Karen was determined to wipe every trace of him from this neighborhood, she'd have to go through me first. Back at the house, I dug through the garage, moving boxes that hadn't been touched since the funeral. Dust danced in the air. I was halfway through a stack labeled Dad's Stuff when a box buckled in my hands, tearing open at the bottom. Papers, envelopes, and old manila folders slid across the floor like someone had opened a time capsule. One folder was thicker than the rest, labeled HOA Disputes 2004-2009. I stared at it for a second, heart thudding. Why would my dad keep HOA dispute records? I cracked it open and squatted on the cold cement floor. The contents were meticulous. Printed complaint forms, handwritten letters, meeting memos with the names of board members from 15 years ago. And at the center, a letter from a man named Alan McCready. The name jolted something in the back of my head. Alan used to live 2 houses down. The letter was addressed directly to my dad. "I'm not the only one," Karen threatened. "I just want this in writing in case she follows through. She's got dirt on half the board and she uses it like leverage. I've seen her forged signatures. One day this is gonna blow." It was dated 2008. I turned the page and found a crumpled photograph taped to the back. A blurry image of what looked like the clubhouse filing cabinet. Karen's hand was halfway inside the drawer, looking around like she was caught. Scrawled underneath in my dad's handwriting, "Caught, red hand. July 2nd, 11:34 p.m. Goosebumps. Cold ones. I stood slowly and scanned the garage. There was more here, somewhere. My dad had kept this hidden for a reason, a trail of truth buried under a decade of dust. I flipped the light switch to get a better look. The bulb flickered, then popped, plunging the garage into a low amber haze from the wall lamp. Classic. I grabbed the flashlight off the shelf and ducked down again. This time, I noticed the wooden hatch in the back corner, half concealed under a roll of insulation. I'd seen it before but never cared enough to open it. It creaked like a coffin lid. Inside was an old plastic tub, sealed with duct tape, the kind you'd only open if you really needed to. I ripped it off and lifted the lid. Inside, VHS tapes. A whole stack, each one labeled by date, and one in red marker, Karen Clubhouse Room B, July 2nd. I nearly dropped it. I sprinted inside, found Liam in the living room with his headphones on. He looked up and paused his music. "You look like you saw a ghost." "Almost." I handed him the tape. "Can you get this converted?" He blinked. "We don't even have a VCR." "Didn't find one." He grinned. "eBay?" "No, call Sam Whitaker. He collects old junk. Tell him I'll trade him that signed Cubs ball if he can get this running by tomorrow." Liam's mouth fell open. "You'd give up Dad's ball?" "If this tape shows what I think it does, we won't just be saving the bench, son. We'll be burying Karen's whole board under their own rules." He jumped up and grabbed his phone. As he walked out, Lana came into the room with folded towels. "You found something?" I nodded. A crack in her armor. And for the first time in weeks, her face softened. "Good, because she's been walking around like she's God with a clipboard." I stared at the tape in my hand. Not for long. The tape clicked into Sam Whitaker's dusty old Panasonic deck with a sound that made my skin crawl. He had it set up in his basement, next to a stack of vintage radios and one of those rotary phones you only see in black and white movies. Liam hovered beside me, arms crossed, bouncing one foot like he was trying to fight gravity. Sam blew on the screen like it'd do anything and hit play. Static, then black and white fuzz, and finally the clubhouse. It was late. The timestamp read 11:33 p.m., July 2nd. Same night written on Dad's label. The frame jumped a bit, the light grainy. Then Karen stepped into view. She looked younger, but that same stiff-shouldered arrogance hadn't aged a day. She glanced over her shoulder, then crouched down in front of a drawer labeled HOA Complaints Archive. She pulled out a stack of forms and paused. What happened next made the room feel smaller. She flipped to a page, glanced toward the door again, then ripped it in half, and another. She shuffled through, tearing, folding, tossing whole documents into her bag. One page she didn't tear. She looked at it longer. She smiled, then slid it into her coat. Liam whispered, That's evidence." "Yeah," I said quietly. "It is." Sam nodded. "Looks like intent to destroy HOA records, possibly even mail fraud if any of those were submitted forms. She was an officer at the time, wasn't she?" "Still is," I muttered. "Board president. Self-appointed monarch of no fun allowed." But under my breath, it clicked. That's what Dad had been holding on to. Not just resentment. Insurance. The next day I went straight to the lake. I needed quiet, to think. The bench was still there, and for a moment I let myself sit. That view. The waterline tracing soft waves. The cedar trees that Dad planted when I was 10. The same rock my mom used to sit on with a book. All still standing, still ours. And yet, Karen was determined to erase it. Not because of a rule, not because of a complaint, but because she could. That's when I saw her, across the lake, walking along the clubhouse path, dressed in her usual cream blazer, clipboard tucked like a sword, sunglasses that never quite hid her scowl. She didn't see me, but the way she walked, faster, sharper, it was like she felt the walls closing in. I left the bench and crossed the lot to my truck. Before I could climb in, I heard it, "Marcus?" I turned. It was Eleanor, HOA secretary. She looked tired. eyes sunken, arms folded like she was holding herself together. I hadn't seen her much since the fine notices started ramping up. She always sat quietly at the meetings, nodding along but never speaking. Her voice cracked a bit. "Can I talk to you for a second?" I hesitated but nodded. She stepped closer. I know I haven't said anything. I'm not proud of that. You were there, Eleanor. You've seen what she's doing. Why stay silent? I have a mortgage, and Karen's. She finds ways to get personal. You don't just lose your seat on the board. She makes you feel like you're crazy, like you're ungrateful. She looked down. Her hands were trembling. I softened. You're not crazy. You're just stuck in a bad system. She made me sign something last month, she whispered. It didn't sit right. It was about your lot line. Said it was part of common property now. My jaw locked. She forged the reassignment? Eleanor nodded, eyes glossy. I kept a copy. I didn't know what to do. I'll get it to you. She didn't say another word, just turned and walked away like it took everything she had to say that much. Liam and I spent the next 3 hours pulling up the original property maps, tax records, and my dad's file copies, and sure enough, the line hadn't changed until recently. Her move wasn't just personal. It was calculated. That night, I sat at the bench again, not just to think, but to plan, because this bench, this lake, was more than just scenery. It was a promise. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one, and if this story's got you fired up the way it did me, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next, because trust me, Karen's about to feel everything she's dished out. The night air by the lake was colder than usual, dusting dew across the grass and the old bench. Caleb and I sat side by side, maps and documents spread on a blanket between us. The moonlight slivered through willow branches, outlining the paper in silver. Our strategy session had begun. I'm calling Novak tomorrow, I said, eyes on the property map. Need his testimony on whether that reassignment ever went through properly. Caleb tilted his head. And you want Eleanor's copy too. He pointed at the scanned PDF on my laptop screen, her confession woven into the scanned deed. That's evidence of forgery or fraud. Exactly, I closed the laptop. But we've got to get it on official letterhead, not just an email attachment. He nodded, slow and sure. I can get in touch with Sandra. She might help us with board minutes or something. I stiffened. Lila? You mean Lila James? Caleb smiled, just a flicker. Lila, she's already uneasy if Sandra's involved. And you've got an insider network. I laid my hand on his shoulder. Good work. By morning, Novak's voice was measured on the voicemail. Lucas, come by around 10. Bring your files. No hesitation. He sounded relieved. I woke Caleb in the kitchen. He found me mid-coffee pour. Got Novak. Meeting at 10. He nodded, straightening. I'll text Sandra, frame it like community-wide concern, not just us. He knows how to play chess. At Novak's, his living room smelled of old paper and lemon polish again. We sat in the same chairs, but this time he brought out a stack of HOA meeting minutes, bound like a book. He cleared his throat. In 2024, Debra pushed the clause expansion in private. Minutes show all board members present, but no vote was recorded. He slid a copy across the table. And here, he tapped a line. No signatures. My heart banged. That was it. Procedural failure. We could challenge it legally. Later that afternoon, we met with Sandra. In the community garden, beside those same struggling tomatoes. She looked anxious, eyes flicking to the ground, hands twisting. Thank you for agreeing, I said. We just need the minutes from that closed meeting in March. Sandra wiped a tear. I saved them. But you have to promise, she looked at Caleb. Promise you'll only use them to restore fairness, not to humiliate anyone. I nodded. That's the goal. Accountability, nothing personal. She passed a sealed envelope, typed minutes, attendee list, a memo from the HOA attorney warning about using the amendment inappropriately. Then she faltered. There's more. Emails. Chain from Deborah telling Travis to enforce the reassignment. I clenched the envelope. Thank you. She didn't smile, but relief washed through her eyes. That evening at home, I sat at the desk in the study. The willow moonlight streamed through the window. On the desk, evidence laid side by side. Tape footage, deed scans, Meeting minutes, Novak's printouts, Sandra's envelope. It looked like an arsenal. I called my property attorney, who told me to file an injunction by Thursday, stop any link or enforcement until the case gets reviewed. That sounded promising. But what if Deborah retaliated? Foreclosure threats, new fines, sabotage. That's when Caleb spoke up. I've got an idea. He leaned forward. What if we invite the community in a letter stating these facts, asking for their testimonies about improper notices and unexplained visits? We'll gather voices. Public pressure, I said, not just legal. He grinned. Exactly. And we can get the club meeting recorded, invite local journalists. My skin tingled. Community plus legal. We'd corner Deborah. We worked late. Caleb typed the letter, I printed copies. By dawn, we'd hand-delivered them to 5 houses. Novak's, Lila's, Eleanor's, Denise's, and 2 more neighbors. At each one, Caleb handed the paper, eyes bright, and said, "We need your story. Want to join?" Most said okay. Others asked questions. No one hung the papers. They were too heavy with truth. By sunrise, 5 statements were filling my inbox, each more damning than the last. Unauthorized entry, unexplained citations, personal property tampering. I closed the laptop and exhaled. Caleb and I stepped outside. The willow tree swayed gently. I reached out and touched a hanging branch, brushing off dew. "This is her last stand," I said softly. "Ready?" He looked up at me, eyes steady, more than ready. We walked back inside, shoulder to shoulder. By Monday morning, the mood across the neighborhood had shifted, subtle but real. Side glances became knowing nods. People who'd barely made eye contact before were stopping to ask if they could add their story to ours. It wasn't loud, but it was spreading. And Deborah knew it. That's probably why she showed up at my doorstep. Not a knock, a pound. I opened the door just enough to see her jaw locked tight, her white blazer sharp as ever, sunglasses perched too high like a mask she didn't know was slipping. "You've got a lot of nerve," she said, voice clipped. "Passing propaganda to residents without board approval is—" "Community rights aren't subject to board approval," I cut in, "and I think you know that." Behind me, Caleb stood with his phone already recording. She noticed and scoffed. "Oh, you've turned this into theater now?" "No," I said, stepping out onto the porch, closing the door behind me. "I'm turning this into accountability." She paused, assessing. "You keep going down this path, Lucas, and there are going to be consequences." That was the moment her smile cracked. And not in a nervous way. It was something worse. The way someone smiles when they've already called the fire department on the house they're standing in. By noon, I knew what she meant. Caleb was outside when he spotted a bright orange sticker slapped onto my mailbox. Violation 27-7, slanderous action toward board. It didn't even sound like a real bylaw, but it had teeth. She'd tried to fine me for sending letters. Caleb peeled it off and muttered, "Petty, she's playing scared." I looked at the sticker, held it between my fingers like it was radioactive. Then let's give her something to really be scared of. We spent the afternoon drafting a formal injunction notice, citing breach of fiduciary duty, improper amendment procedures, and abuse of enforcement powers. My lawyer added the legal language, and by 3:00 p.m. the motion was filed with the county clerk's office. A copy was emailed to every board member. Deborah didn't reply, but that night her porch light stayed off for the first time in months. The next morning, something even more unexpected happened. Sandra texted, one word. "Lila." We met her outside Novak's by the lake path. Lila stood there already, arms crossed, eyes red, like she hadn't slept. She didn't waste time. "She's forging proxy votes," she said quietly. "Every vote in the last 3 meetings. Deborah marked them. I found scanned copies of signatures. Reused." Caleb sucked in a breath. "That's She nodded, a tight, bitter nod. "I'm not protecting her anymore. Not after she threatened my job if I talked." My hands were cold even though the sun was out. "Can you prove it?" She pulled out a flash drive. "Every fake proxy is on here. I took screenshots, metadata timestamps, it's all there." I took the drive with both hands like it was sacred. "Lila?" "I know that took guts." She looked up, eyes full of something I hadn't seen in her before. Quiet, exhausted defiance. This place used to mean something. I'm not letting her twist it anymore." We shook hands. She left. Later that day, I called the local paper, not a big outlet, just a community blog with a solid readership, and a writer named Darcy who'd once written about a squirrel that caused a blackout. She listened as I laid it out. Illegal votes, retributive fines, backdated clauses. At the end of the call, she said, "You have docs to back this?" I emailed her everything. 5 minutes later, she texted, "Running this in the morning." That night, I sat by the old bench under the willow tree. Same bench my dad and I sat on years ago when he first taught me how to skip stones and told me, "You protect what matters, even if it's quiet, especially if it's quiet." I heard Caleb walking up behind me. "Papers publishing?" he asked. "Yeah," I nodded slowly. "Tomorrow's gonna be loud." He handed me a folded sheet, another statement from a neighbor that made 12. 12 people ready to testify, he said. "You still think this is about just one lake house?" I looked out over the water, where the moon reflected like a coin flipped by something ancient. "No," I said, "this is about stopping rot before it eats through the whole frame." Because it wasn't just about my family's bench or a fake fine anymore, it was about what happens when you let power hide behind paperwork. And tomorrow we were dragging it into the sun. By sunrise it was out. Darcy's article dropped like a match in dry leaves. Headline, "Lake Grove HOA President Accused of Proxy Fraud, Abuse of Power." The photo underneath was a scan of one of the falsified proxy forms. Desmond's initials scrawled at the bottom like a signature on a forged will. By 8 a.m. my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months. Screenshots, quotes. One guy sent me a selfie flipping off the HOA bulletin board. And then, silence. Not from the neighborhood, from Deborah. No response. No press statement. No rebuttal. By noon, she'd gone full bunker mode. Her porch light stayed off again. Her SUV was still parked in the same spot, dusty and unmoved. But silence doesn't stop momentum, it only confirms it. I spent most of the morning meeting with a civil rights attorney. Sandra's connection, guy named Meeks, wore a linen jacket and carried 3 ballpoint pens like they were weapons. Sharp guy. "I read the blog," he said, flipping through a printed copy of the article. "This is more than HOA misconduct. This is systemic abuse. You've got public interest written all over it." Caleb leaned forward. "You're saying we could take this beyond local?" "I'm saying," Meeks said, tapping a page, "this could be the first domino." He laid out the plan. Injunctions, a special meeting vote to suspend board powers, civil fraud charge if we could corroborate even one manipulated vote on financial matters. "But," he added, "you'll need one thing she's not expecting. Numbers." "We've got 12 testimonies already," I told him. "You'll need 20, minimum, on record, not just anonymous notes and nods. I need names, faces." He stood, shaking my hand. "I'll draft the paperwork, you give me the people." Back at the house, I stood in the kitchen flipping through my late dad's old binder, neatly organized with every HOA meeting he ever attended, his handwriting in the margins. Notes like, "Don't let them scare you, quiet." Outside, the clouds were starting to roll in, and as I stared at his scrawled words, I thought about how many folks in this place had been scared silent for too long. I texted Caleb. "Me. We need to go door to door, tonight." Caleb, already loading the car, got the cam too. We started at the end of Cedar Ridge, house by house. Some folks shut the door before we finished our pitch. Others cracked it just wide enough to whisper things like, "I always thought something was off," or "She fined me $400 0 cents for a gutter she claimed wasn't HOA compliant, but I built it myself before she was even president." By the 5th house, I stopped asking if they wanted to be on record. I started saying, "Do you want your story to be the one that helps end this?" By 10 p.m., we had 18 full testimonies on video. One woman, Marcia, soft-spoken with sharp eyes, had receipts going back 5 years. Deborah had raised her dues 3 times without a majority vote. "I didn't say anything," she said, tearing up on camera. "I thought I'd be targeted if I spoke up." "You were," Caleb said gently. "We all were, just in different ways." When we got back to the house, I uploaded everything to a secure drive. Labeled, backed up, time-stamped. Caleb poured us 2 mugs of burnt coffee. Neither of us drank it. Instead, I walked out to the willow tree. Same bench, same worn grain beneath my hand. The wind was moving harder now, shaking the leaves like applause. Caleb joined me quietly. "Tomorrow," I said, "we call for a vote of no confidence. You think the board will cave?" "No." I smiled at the dark water. "But it won't matter. We've got enough to force a court-supervised special meeting. They won't have time to maneuver." Behind us, the house lights flickered from Sandra's place. She'd texted earlier that she had 2 more residents willing to testify. That made 20. This wasn't about power anymore. It was about proving no one, no matter how high they sit behind a gate or title, gets to bend the truth until it breaks. Not in this town, not on this land, not with my father's name still etched into the tree trunk behind me. Tomorrow, the real vote begins. Where are you watching from? Have you ever dealt with an HOA pushing too far, bending the rules, or silencing people who just wanted fairness? Drop your story in the comments and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The morning sun sliced between the wooden slats of our porch railing, illuminating the stack of documents on the table. Our evidence arsenal now included 20 recorded testimonies, falsified proxy forms, deed forgeries, board minutes, and Novak's affidavit. I sat at the edge of the porch, notebook open, trying to sketch out what came next. "First order of business," Caleb said, sipping his coffee slowly. "We file the petition for a special meeting by noon, and remind them that if they refuse, we'll go straight to court." I nodded. "Right. And after—" My words stopped when headlights pulled into our driveway, a black sedan, sleek, unmarked. Deborah stepped out. No clipboard, no sunglasses, but her expression was sharper than ever, eyes distant, calculating. "Good morning, Lucas," she said, and didn't wait for me to invite her in. Walked past me and turned to Caleb. "You too." He stayed silent. She eyed our kitchen table. "I suppose I should be upset. You've made this public, called neighbors, filed legal actions. Are you sure you understand how serious this is?" I stood. "I understand full well. Enough lies and forged documents. They don't hold up in court. They don't hold up in a community." She smiled, cold. "I didn't expect this from you, Lucas. Your dad would be disappointed." My face tightened. "Don't drag him into this." Her eyes narrowed. "Fine. You've gotten a lot of people riled up, but watch what you wish for." She turned, marched out to her sedan, and drove away. Caleb exhaled. "She's rattled, not backing down." I grabbed my phone. "Okay, let's move. Now." We headed straight to the county clerk's office, stack in hand. Caleb handed the clerk our petition package. They stamped it, and we got our official date, 5 days from now. Special HOA meeting, court sanction. When we left, Caleb asked, "You okay?" I looked at him. "Honestly, it feels heavy, but not ashamed." Back home, the neighborhood tabloid wasn't subtle. Its headline, "HOA Special Meeting, Deborah Faces Winter of Reckoning," a caricature of her behind bars for documents. By the afternoon, I'd received another text from Lila. She's organizing her neighbors to walk in silent protest. Might bring signs. My chest tightened, thinking about that many faces, walking into the meeting together. Between drafts, calls, and coordination with Meeks, I barely noticed the storm rolling in. Dark clouds snapped across the sky, wind picking up, rattling the front door. I paused, looking at the willow tree beyond the porch. Its branches lashed against the wind like a drummer building tempo. Rain started, soft at first, then heavier, smacking the paper on my notes. Caleb wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Looks like the universe wants us ready." "Fitting," I took a deep breath. "Meeting's our stage." Evening came, and we met with Eleanor and Sandra at Novak's house, lobbing through speaker notes. Their hands shook less now, more determination than fear. Sandra read the talking points aloud. Improper board conduct, proxy vote fraud, potential civil liability. Eleanor repeated hers. It wasn't perfect, but it was genuine. Caleb added, "And we asked the board to step aside until the claims are fully investigated. No signature, just a vote." They all inhaled. It wasn't easy asking for Deborah's resignation. It was necessary. Next morning, nervous energy buzzed through our email chains. Posters were printed. Neighbor groups finalized their walk. A local journalist from Darcy's blog confirmed attendance. I grabbed my umbrella and headed to the lake. Little islands of disturbance formed in the water where raindrops hit. I stared at the willow. It took a beating from wind and weather, yet stayed rooted. I touched the bark, trailing my fingertips through hardened grooves. Years of storms hadn't toppled it. If that tree could hold on, so could we. Caleb came up behind me, voice low. Tonight changes everything. I nodded, for the neighborhood, for every dad and son who sat on this bench. He offered a half smile. Let's get back. We turned away, walking hand in hand toward the house, toward our moment. The meeting was set for 6 p.m. sharp, but by 5:15 the community center parking lot was already packed. Neighbors we hadn't seen in months were showing up in raincoats, umbrellas in hand, some clutching folders like they were walking into court themselves. Inside, the energy was taut. Not angry, focused. Rows of chairs filled fast, the buzz low but steady like bees ready to swarm. Deborah's crew, tight-lipped, sharply dressed, stood near the podium. She wore cream again. Always cream. Power color. I walked in, with Caleb beside me, Eleanor and Sandra a step behind. Novak was already seated, front row. He nodded once, firm. Deborah raised her chin. Let's begin. She tapped the mic. This special meeting has been called to discuss unfortunate rumors being spread around the community regarding board conduct. Let's correct that, I said, stepping up before she could go on. It's not a rumor, it's a pattern, and tonight's about facts. Whispers broke through the room like wind through brittle branches. Deborah tightened her jaw. Lucas, you've made your point. You've turned this into a spectacle. No, Caleb interrupted. You did that the moment you signed those fake proxies and claimed Novak was unstable. Gasps rippled. Deborah turned, stiff. You don't get to dictate this. I don't have to. I held up a copy of the official petition. 62 signatures, verified. And here's a notarized affidavit from Mr. Novak. I looked out across the room. He never authorized the board to vote on his behalf. Eleanor stood. You forged it, Deborah, and you tried to silence us. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. Real. You could hear the years of obedience cracking apart. Sandra joined in. And for what? To push out residents you didn't like? People who didn't fit your mold? Bevra's face flushed crimson. You're just angry because you lied, I cut in, and tonight we vote. Deborah scoffed. You think this little performance wins you the community? Caleb took the mic. We're not performing, we're reclaiming. The moderator, a quiet man named Harris, who used to coach Little League, cleared his throat. All right, per the bylaws, a vote of no confidence in the current board can be held with a quorum of homeowners, which we've surpassed. He glanced up. Ballots have been printed and verified by the county clerk's office. Hands went up, voices joined, people lining up. One by one, they dropped their vote into the clear plastic bin. Some stared down Deborah as they passed. Others just looked relieved. Deborah stood frozen, jaw clenched, arms folded. She didn't speak. And when the votes were counted, 68 in favor of dissolving the board. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of win. It felt more like waking up after a long, bitter storm. Deborah turned, collected her papers, but before she walked off, she paused beside me. You'll regret this, she said, voice cold and flat. I looked her in the eyes. Only if I let people like you win. She left without another word. By 7:45, Harris swore in a temporary committee, including Eleanor, Sandra, and Novak. The room had started to empty, but no one wanted to leave fast. People lingered, hugged, talked like neighbors again. Outside, the rain had stopped. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You did it. I shook my head. We did, and not just tonight. This was years of silence breaking all at once. He glanced around. Feels like the neighborhood finally exhaled. We walked back home slowly, past the willow tree. A kid's bicycle leaned against it, forgotten in the rush. I reached out, touched the trunk again. 2 weeks later, I stood on the porch again, but this time there was no storm rolling in. The air was still. Not silent, just normal. A lawnmower buzzed in the distance. Kids were chalking a driveway across the street. Eleanor walked by, holding hands with her granddaughter, and waved like we'd been neighbors our whole lives. Funny what peace feels like when you finally earn it. The temporary committee had been working non-stop. Sandra took over communications, transparent updates, open books. Novak sat in on the bylaws revision team. The new board elections were next month, but the community already looked different. Not just in paperwork, in spirit. Caleb walked out, phone in hand, a grin tugging his face. "Guess what?" I raised an eyebrow. "You just won the lottery." He chuckled. "Better. Remember that lakefront zoning issue? Turns out, Deborah pushed through permits for a dock expansion under her brother-in-law's name." "Seriously?" "Yeah, county's opening an investigation. Ethics violation, conflict of interest. It's all unraveling." I let out a slow breath. "Good, let it." He leaned beside me, quiet for a second. "You ever think about what would have happened if we'd just stayed quiet?" "Every day," I said. And I never liked the answer. Across the street, a group of neighbors had gathered, folding chairs, lemonade. Eleanor called over, "Lucas, you two coming?" I glanced at Caleb. "Only if someone brought those ridiculous cheese crackers." "We brought 'em," someone yelled. We laughed and walked over. The old guard had ruled with fear and silence. But now, people were laughing again. Doors open, conversations lingering. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt like home, not a battlefield. Midway through the hangout, Lila pulled me aside. "Hey," she said, lowering her voice, "there's something I didn't say before." "Yeah?" She hesitated. I knew Deborah was twisting things with Novak. She made me deliver those proxy forms, told me it was just a formality. "Well, didn't you say anything?" "I was scared," she swallowed. "I thought keeping quiet would protect me, but when you stood up at that meeting, it made me realize I was just enabling her." I nodded slowly. "Takes guts to admit that." She offered a faint smile. "I'd like to help, however I can." I looked out at the circle of neighbors. "You already did." Later that night, I walked down to the lake alone. The willow was still there, stoic as ever. Its shadow stretched long across the grass. I sat on the same bench my dad used to. The wood creaked beneath me. "Hey, old man," I whispered. "We didn't back down." The water was calm. No wind, no fight. Just peace. I pulled out the folded piece of paper I'd carried since the first petition. My dad's last note to me was scribbled on the back. "Dignity's not loud, but it echoes." I folded it back, placed it inside my coat pocket, and stood. We didn't just fight the HOA, we reclaimed our dignity and gave the neighborhood back to the people who actually lived here. Your voice matters, even when they try to silence you. If you've ever had a battle with an HOA, share your story below. Let's make noise for the quiet ones who finally stood up. Where are you watching from? We'd love to hear.